Hi, this is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and welcome to this episode of Legislative Update. With me today is State Senator Julian Cyr and State Rep Sarah Peake, and we're going to take a look at the very full fall schedule up on Beacon Hill. Welcome, and thanks for being with us today.
Hi,
hey,
thanks.
Teresa.
It's great seeing you. How'd y'all survive the summer?
Well, I mean, you can tell by our tans, we definitely did get some good time, but like everything in public service, there's always the unexpected. Certainly we had a very busy summer season here. I think that was a lot of good, welcome news for Cape Codders and Islanders, but some unexpected challenges, of course, grappling with COVID-19. Sarah and I were really in the weeds with the Provincetown cluster. I think, the good news there is we were able to get a handle on that situation, and really, what came out of Provincetown really helped lead the nation and really inform the nation about how do we live with and navigate Delta, right? And what are the tools that we use to keep people safe with this latest variant of COVID-19. Now we're back at it. Things have ramped up at Beacon Hill, and we've got a pretty full agenda on our plate for the fall.
Well, that's what I was saying. We're into the fall. We're heading into the last quarter of the calendar year. What are some of the highlights that are coming up?
So one of the big things that's coming up that we have to get done and laid on the governor's desk by probably the third week in October is the legislation that will delineate what the maps are for congressional districts, state Senate districts, and House districts. We have the final numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau. Both Julian and I have sat on the special committee on redistricting. Kip Diggs from the Cape was also on that committee, so we were well represented on it. And now it's a matter of crunching the numbers. But there's some good news for the Cape and Islands there. While there were parts of the state, specifically Western Mass, that lost significant population, we actually gained population here in our Outer Cape communities. We gained a significant amount of population on Nantucket, and all of the towns on the Vineyard gained population. In fact, every town in Barnstable County, with the exception of Sandwich, gained in population. So we don't have specifics yet, and it would be premature to sort of talk about what the maps are going to look like, but a general principle, I think, is 10 years ago, we all had to push west. As one of my colleagues says, he thinks of Cape Cod like a toothpaste tube, and if you squeeze at the bottom, everything comes out this way. Well, everything pushed west 10 years ago because of a drop in population. I think we're going to be able to do some shifting back east, which would be a great thing. It would be good for our colleague from the 5th Barnstable District, who represents towns on the Cape, but he also has a precinct in Plymouth. Perhaps he'll be able to back out of that Plymouth precinct and just be a Cape Cod rep, which is better for all of us here on the Cape. And so that will be coming out. We will be looking at the Arpa funds. There's public hearings going on now, Special Joint Committee of House and Senate Ways and Means, hearing feedback from a variety of people. They're holding a series of meetings sort of by general subject matters. So rather than just go and make decisions about how this should be spent, the legislature, we're taking it on the chin a little bit from the governor for taking our time, but we're taking our time because we're seeking public input. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to serve people better than rushing money out the door and maybe overlooking some very important things.
Well, can one of you talk a little bit about what the Arpa funds are for those who aren't familiar with it?
Sure. So this is the American Rescue Plan Act that was passed shortly after President Biden was sworn into office, and it provides billions of dollars to state, county, and local governments across the nation. Every town on the Cape has received millions of dollars from this plan. Barnstable County has a pretty hefty chunk of cash to spend, over $40 million. And at the state, we have $5.3 billion, about $5 billion of that left to be appropriated. These are one-time funds, right? So we've got to be very judicious about how we spend them, right? You wouldn't want to, say put a lot of this money into, say a program that's meant to help people that you want to continue after a year or two. And so we're really trying to be deliberate about how do the ARPA funds solve the biggest challenges that we're facing, right? How can we use ARPA to truly face the climate crisis and really adapt and make some tough choices about how we're going to live our lives and do some good planning there? How do we use ARPA funds to really work to solve the housing crisis, which is something that's nothing new to Cape Codders, but, across Eastern Massachusetts, we have just not kept up with housing production. It has led to this affordability crunch that is untenable. How do we use these dollars? Other infrastructure projects, projects, wastewater, transportation, et cetera. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. And so we should be moving, deliberately here, right? Because these are investments that are going to make a difference, right? Not just for the next few years, but the next several decades. And so that's why we're really being deliberate here and being smart about what the investments are. And fortunately, we're able to do so because broader state revenues have been so strong and so robust. We're in a much better fiscal shape than we expected. So we're trying to use this sort of once in a generation opportunity to make some smart investments.
You were saying you wanted to get input from it. How are people giving input to what's happening?
Well, there's a variety of ways. This special committee of the Senate and House Ways and Means Committee is holding public hearings. People can go to malegislature.gov and find the public notice of those hearings. They've had, I think, 3 already, so they're in the process of wrapping up. I'm not sure how many more are scheduled, quite honestly. People can write to Senator Cyr and myself, email us. Our email addresses are findable and clickable on that same malegislature.gov website. And they can also write to the Ways and Means Committees of both the House and the Senate directly. And those links are also clickable on the malegislature.gov website. So yesterday, it won't be yesterday by the time this is viewed, but recently, the senator and I had the opportunity to spend the day with Housing and Economic Development Secretary Mike Keneally, who came down, started his day in Provincetown, and then made his way towards the Mid-Cape area. So we made stops in Provincetown, Harwich, and then later in Barnstable. And what was interesting is whether it was talking with small business owners in Provincetown, the issue came up about, I can't find people to work because there's no place for them to live. I'm trying to buy housing for my workers. Then we went down to Harwich and talked with larger business owners. Ace Hardware, one of the major flooring and carpeting retailers that we have on the Outer and Lower Cape, maybe one of the major ones that we have on Cape Cod. Mid-Cape Home Center. What's your biggest barrier to growth? What's your biggest barrier to keeping your doors open 7 days a week? Housing. We have no place for our workers to live. So I think he heard loud and clear what the senator and I have known from speaking with our constituents, that housing is the juggernaut that is going to limit our ability to not only to help grow businesses, but to keep the Outer and Lower Cape and all of Cape Cod and the islands a vital place for families, retirees, everybody to live and work. Some interesting ideas came up. The senator and I have been working with Homeless Prevention Council and the Community Development Partnership here on the Outer and Lower Cape. They have a proposal to set up a grant funding project to help people develop these so-called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, some grant funding to help get them through the regulatory process, maybe low, no interest loans to help them build those out. Those then can become housing for folks. So we're working on a number of ideas, and we certainly welcome input from the public or other stakeholders who are out there who may be watching this.
I do think what's important around housing, and we're going to work to, use the Arpa funds to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars for housing. But, I want to remind viewers that, housing is about, local decision as well, right? Land use policy in Massachusetts, for better or worse, is controlled at the local level by 351 cities and towns. And so, we also really need each and one of our towns and our town meetings to really get that they've got to really have skin in the game when it comes to housing development. The good news is we have the tools and resources, and we have the cash in our communities, right, to actually solve this problem. And when our communities want to do, big things, they're able to do it. Look at what Brewster's doing with the Cape Cod Sea Camps. But I think it's important that people remember that because of the way that land use policy and housing is structured in Massachusetts, this isn't just a problem that Sarah and I can solve in Peake and Hill working with our colleagues. I kind of wish we could, but it's really on, all of us at town meeting to get really serious about housing production and housing preservation, to reject this NIMBYism that sort of says, oh no, well, we can't have, I don't want these in my backyard. Look, if we don't change what we're doing on housing, we're not going to be a sustainable year-round community. I can speak to this personally. I can speak to this as a young Cape Codder. My generation's getting pushed out, and we're not going to have future generations unless we're changing what we're doing, and it's got to start at the town level.
Well, one of the things that people struggle with housing is having minimum acreage to build and this whole notion of density. And that doesn't come from the state, right? That is all local.
That's local. And we've got to change these zoning rules at the local level. And if you think about it, think about how Cape Cod was built in the 19th century. You didn't build a house way off on a bluff somewhere because you were remote. You probably get blown away. Right. We were built very much in these dense villages. Think of Provincetown and Chatham and across the region. And so I think we've got to really change our thinking here. And we have to really recognize that the suburban type development that we've seen on Cape Cod, basically from the post-war era until now, has been a real catastrophe. It's been not good for our environment, particularly with our Title V septic systems that have been polluting our embayments. And it's not been good for getting housing for Cape Codders, the people who live here. And really now with this, red hot luxury real estate market where, unless you're someone with substantial resources, you just can't buy in. I think we really need to reorient ourselves and actually go back to the way how we used to, build and live on Cape Cod, which is denser, smarter. And so we're going to try to do everything we can at the state level to incentivize, get some tools. But, as Sarah and I said, right, we need the towns and townspeople and town meeting to have skin in the game as well.
Well, could this state money do something like, support infrastructure that would support a certain kind of development? Would that be an appropriate interaction?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Cloverleaf Project's an example of that. We were able to bring town water, because the line goes right by there that comes into Provincetown from those Truro wells, with a Mass Works grant. So that helped in large part to pay for that. As you may recall, we spent quite a bit of time on past episodes talking about the Cape and Islands Wastewater Trust Fund.
Yes.
All of these short-term rentals now, there is a surcharge, 2.75% on top of that goes into the wastewater trust. That is helping make the development of wastewater affordable for communities. Mashpee just had an article before their town meeting to pay for a major part of their wastewater structure, and they did not have to add a penny of tax burden to the real property owner to do it, thanks in large part to that trust fund that was established. And the money that goes in there leverages bonding authority, so you can bond out and pay for those things. I think the other thing that communities can look to is this, what is still new money, and I sound like an old record talking about what is still new money. Town meeting voters can make the decision to take all of that new money from these short-term rentals that have never been taxed before and put 100% of it towards housing production and development. And that is a way at the local level to help pay for this. And this is a very big tool in the toolbox that the state legislature and the state government has given local communities, particularly on the Cape and Islands. I don't think there's any other region, maybe Boston is benefiting as much from the tax on the short-term rentals, but this is a real economic boon to every community on Cape Cod and the island. So I would encourage communities, if you're not at the maximum 6% local share, first thing, vote yourself up to 6% local share. There's only a couple. Harwich is one of them that isn't at that. I understand there's special fall town meeting. That will be on the agenda. And then take that money and direct it towards housing and infrastructure to support housing, because there's a tremendous amount of funds there.
Well, to me, it's interesting. So what you're just saying now weaves with what you just said before about the census results and the population shifts of actually increasing here. So those two things, if more people want to be here, how do we enable them to be here with these pools of money? It's an interesting intersection that I think some of you guys are really digging into this fall.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting also because I think a lot of people came here during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic because they could breathe. They could go out for a walk. They could visit with friends outside. They could feel safe in a way that maybe in their more urban or suburban what used to be their primary residence, they weren't able to. So just as Cape Cod has embraced the senator and myself and you, Teresa, we embraced, in effect, these COVID refugees. And many now are choosing to stay here and make this their home and send their kids to our schools. All of this is great news, but we need infrastructure in place to help support them as well. And, whether that's wastewater infrastructure, whether that's robust broadband, or whether it is building housing for our workforce. I won't even call it affordable housing, but building housing for our workforce. So when somebody goes to the hardware store, they don't find it closed on a Saturday afternoon because they don't have staff to keep it open, or they can't go out to eat, or whatever it might be. And that is the tipping point we're at now, where businesses that used to be open 7 days a week are open 5. Those that used to be open 5 are open 3 or 4 days a week. I think within, this has been a slow creep that we have seen, but it has accelerated. It reached a tipping point 3 to 5 years ago, and it has accelerated. And now it is visible and clear for all to see.
We do have a few other things you're working on this fall, though, too, right? I understand you're taking up some issues of mental health. You're taking up some voting issues. Talk about those.
We're doing a lot. So we got a lot on our agenda. So the ARPA funds that we're going to take up, redistricting, which Sarah talked about. We've got to make some changes to our voting law. There were some short-term changes that were made in the pandemic. The House has actually already passed an expansion of voting access bill. The Senate's going to be taking that up. Also in the Senate, we are going to be taking up mental health legislation. Again, this is something that I actually had the real honor to lead in the Senate last session when we took up in the Senate and passed the Mental Health ABC Act. And although we weren't able to get it over the finish line, in part largely due to the pandemic and getting pulled in so many other directions, we had a lot of provisions of that bill actually done through the budget and through a supplemental budget as well. We're now going to come back, take up legislation as it relates to mental health parity, access to mental health. Workforce is a really big challenge we also face. So we know there's so much need for mental health services and care, but we don't really have the workforce we need. So we're going to also be doing that this fall. The Senate president really wants to see a bill on the governor's desk by the end of the year. We're going to try to make that happen. But, I think either way, this is something, we've got great partnership in the House as well. And I'm hoping we can make some traction here. So it's a pretty robust, heavy agenda, considering the opportunities we have. So certainly stay tuned.
That's exciting stuff.
And I have a couple of significant climate change bills that are getting ready to have hearings. One involves a buyback program and also works to ensure that we don't continue to build in low and vulnerable areas, whether that is around the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston or on an eroding coastal bluff on Cape Cod or the islands. And then the other one, we actually have a climate action plan in Massachusetts. The legislature mandated that, and the Baker administration developed it in their first term, but it had no teeth. There's no mandate that state and other governmental agencies have to follow and adopt those guidelines. So my second piece of legislation is basically to give some teeth to the climate action plan that has already been developed, already been filed, and make sure that that is something that is actually implemented and doesn't sit in a ring binder up on somebody's shelf, just gathering dust while we're buying sump pumps to, pump out the basements of our local town halls when there's a lunar high tide, seasonal high tide.
That's one incredible agenda you guys have going forward. Well, believe it or not, we are almost out of time for today. And I know that we're going to be talking about these coming up in the next coming months. Any last thoughts you want to leave us with, the sort of themes for the fall up at the State House?
I
threw you, didn't I?
Well, I think it's going to be a very busy fall. I think while we're working on all of these things that Julian and I talked about, we are also keeping an eye on what is happening with COVID and the Delta variant or any other variants that come along. And so there's always this public health management that we are going to be keeping a weather eye on, and whether that is reinstitution of some of the public health policies that were put in place during the pandemic under the emergency order, or where emergency funding or relief is needed, to help schools, businesses, whatever it might be. That's not yet in the rearview mirror. So while we're working on ARPA funding, while we're doing redistricting, while we're doing climate change, while we're doing mental health bills, I think that we can't forget that we are still learning how to live with this pandemic. Maybe it's an endemic now, I'm not sure, but learning how to live with that. I would just ask people to please get vaccinated if you're not vaccinated. When the time's appropriate, go get a flu shot. We've all been sitting home with masks on when we're out. We don't want this to be a horrible flu season. So there are public health measures that we can all take that are simple and easy to help get this under control, but we've all got to do our part.
Well said, Sarah. I think the metric that folk at Cape Cod should be watching when it comes to COVID-19 is hospitalizations. If we look at the experience overall this summer across the entire region, and even in Provincetown, right, where we had over 1,000 confirmed cases, which means if they're confirmed cases, right, we're talking about many, many more cases that we haven't captured in public health surveillance. With all of those cases, there were only 8 hospitalizations, none of them leading in any death associated with a cluster. That's really good news that shows that the vaccine is working. And so the metric that we're watching most closely when it comes from a Cape Cod perspective, because our communities are some of the best vaccinated communities, not in the state, in the entire country, we're watching the hospitalization number. And so long as hospitalizations remain manageable and relatively low in Cape Cod, which they are, we continue to be vigilant, but that's the metric to watch. I think with these broader themes, what I really kind of love about all this is I think we've got some really big challenges here, but they're all interrelated. If we can, get our act together on planning for a changing climate, right, that's going to allow us to make some really good decisions about where we invest in our communities and maybe some places where we retreat and we don't. If we can invest in wastewater infrastructure, that's really going to do a lot to help us with housing. If we can get housing right, we can have a sustainable year-round community. So I really love how this is all interwoven, but I think it's going to take Cape Codders, all of us, pulling in the same direction to fix these big challenges. Yes, doing that in Beacon Hill, which Sarah and I, do every day and do in a really strong partnership with the rest of our delegation, but also at the local level. So I think that really gives me some hope and promise, but we got a lot of work to do. So strap in.
All right. So you heard it. We've got a ride ahead of us. Thank you guys very much for being with us. Once again, this has been Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and joining us today has been State Senator Julian Cyr and State Rep Sarah Peake. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.